sisters, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Hello, everybody. Carlton Pearson. Welcome to Come Monday. Come Sunday was the movie. I hope you've seen it on Netflix. It's still out. It came out last April. Come Monday is the movement away from traditional modules and paradigms, socially, religiously, politically, spiritually. The old way is being replaced with a new way. And there's a movement into a broader, more expansive and extensive way of looking at yourself, at the universe, at each other, of being freer from some of the bondages culturally and religiously that have sort of held us in hostage for many, many years as a culture. And I'm talking 2,000 years of entrenched indoctrinations in so many different ways. And now in this 21st century, this is the year 2019. We're 19 years into the new millennium. So this is the third millennium we're working on now. We're coming out of 2,000 years, and now 19 years by the Protestant calendar into a new millennium, a new age, if you will. I know that term makes some people uncomfortable. Today happens to be Martin Luther King's birthday, a national holiday. Happy birthday to you. Stevie Wonder wrote that song. I remember him actually singing it at my godmother's 80th birthday. He sang it on the phone to her, and I put it on a mic. She's been gone since she was 91, 3 years ago. That song brings that up to me. But I remember when he first wrote it and how it was selected to be the song that is most remembered and sang around this day. Dr. Martin Luther King, the great dreamer. He gave many, many speeches. He was a prolific speaker, thinker, writer. But that speech, I Have a Dream, of course, is the one that will be rehearsed and repeated maybe thousands of times today, has been, will be continued throughout the evening and throughout the week and the month. Next month is African American History Month, and so we're going to be thinking about that. It's a beautiful, wonderful, extraordinary reality in American history, but also one of the most painful and pathetic, as well as prophetic times in American history. A dream is a cherished aspiration. It's an ambition, or I call an ambition. It's a desire, it's an idea or an ideal that a person has. Dr. King was a dreamer. We heard that famous dream spoken and now written, but sometimes a dream exists only in the imagination. It's something that happens while you're asleep. I'm a dreamer. When I have a history of dreaming in my family. My parents, particularly my mom and grandmother and my aunts, and a lot of the women dreamed. A lot of my great-grandfather was a dreamer, and we see things and feel things and sense things in our dreams, and then we walk them out. But my favorite dreams are the ones I dream while I'm awake, and I'm imagining, and I have these ideas. An idea is a thought or a suggestion as to a possible course of action. I have these ideas, and then I have ideals. That's existing only in the imagination. Desirable, perfect, but not likely to become a reality unless you work hard at it. It's almost like a fantasy. And you are a fan of your fantasies, and you fantasize about some huge possibilities. He dreamed of an America that many of us have seen when he said, I've been to the mountaintop the night before he was assassinated. I've seen the promised land. We've all been to that mountaintop. We've seen and experienced that promised land that he saw. I have in my lifetime. When he made the dream, and we made that speech, a lot of us we fantasized about the dream, but nobody really thought it would happen so quickly, and it did. Things really changed in so many ways, though today it looks like nothing has changed in many ways. But we've gone all the way to the place where we've had an African-American president, first family, one of the most articulate, charming, dignified, smart visionaries in American history as president, an elegant, smart wife that is one of the highest, most favored people on the planet. She actually eclipsed Hillary in being the most popular woman, female, for this year. She's highly regarded. Her daughters and their children were highly respected. They never embarrassed or shamed our country. And there was not a lot of conflict around them other than certain aspects of racism. But we were still very, very proud. And I wondered if Dr. King was alive today, what he would see, what he would think regarding his dream. He would have been 90 years old. And my dad would have been 92, going on 93, just a couple of years older than Dr. King. I'm going to use tonight some of his phrases, some of my favorite quotes by Dr. King. One of them, in light of the way things are in our country right now with the nation government shut down. I think we're going into 29 days. Tuesday, tomorrow, 800,000 government workers, most of them will not get a check again. This is the second time they will have worked or been shut down from working. Some of them actually are on furlough. Some of them actually have to work without pay. They're demanded to work. It's unconscionable, something we would have never expected, and they've happened before, but short periods of time, not going on a month. And these are working people that live hand to mouth. They live off the check they get that week or every 2 weeks. And so it's a sad time in American history, and it seems like the clock has been turned back. Highest rate of anti-Semitic hate crimes in our country, insults, bullying. And a lot of people are depressed, even though we're celebrating the birthday not only of a man, but of dreams. And he only lived 39 years. He wasn't even 40 when he was gunned down. The night before he was gunned down, he spoke in the national headquarters called the Temple of the Churches of God in Christ. That's the denomination I'm a fourth generation member of and preacher. That's all we've known on both sides of the family. And we were very proud that he gave his last speech in our headquarters, but that same city the next day, gunned down from the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, which is now a museum. I remember my first trip to Memphis was when I was around 14 years old, and I'd never been in the deep South before in my life. And I felt smothered and claustrophobic. I was born in Southern California, and there's racism wherever there are racists. I understand that. Some racism is not really as toxic. It's just preferences and sometimes prejudging another race or another culture or color or another gender or another nationality. But there's no harm in it when you don't try to harm somebody. But then there's this other vicious, I want to hurt the person I don't understand. I want to hurt the person that doesn't look like me. I want to deprive the person or deprave the person or demean or insult, speak condescendingly or look condescendingly at a person. That's the kind that's lethal. That's the kind that is intolerable. That's the kind that needs to be eradicated and uprooted from the culture or not legally permitted to be expressed. So looking at today, one of my favorite comments from Dr. King is this: we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Finite means limited or temporary, finishable. We must accept finite disappointment, because disappointment doesn't mean unappointment. We still have an appointment with destiny. We still, and you do, you still, no matter what you're going through, if it's negative and demeaning and insulting and a setback, it's only temporary, because you're designed in your spiritual and biological DNA to go forward, to move forward, to expand, to extend, to reach, and that's what you're going to do. This is a temporary one, but when I look at our country today, where the government's looking, where politics are, the huge polarities between the parties and opinions, the tension, I don't remember experiencing it this way since Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, excuse me. I remembered President JFK, John F. Kennedy, being assassinated in 1964, actually 63 in November. I remember being in my 5th grade classroom and hearing it announced over the loudspeaker Usually they would do that when something dramatic is occurring. There was some bad announcement. So when that ding-dong came on, everybody stopped, and they announced that the president had been assassinated. I didn't even know what the word meant. It was stunning. I learned within minutes that he was dead. And I remember the feeling I felt, because I remember my grandmother telling me who she was voting for. There was a big picture of JFK on a billboard in San Diego. We were driving along Wabash Freeway, and that's what it was called in those days. And they were announcing it on the radio. She had the radio on, and this announcement came, a campaign announcement about him. And I said to my grandmother, and I called her Big Mama, "Who you voting for, Big Mama?" And she looked and saw his big picture on that billboard, and she pointed. She said, "Him." She didn't even say his name. "I'm voting for him." And instantly, I loved him, just because Big Mama voted for him. I figured if Big Mama voted for him, that meant God, the Holy Ghost, angels, even the devil was voting for Kennedy, because Big Mama was voting for him. And so I didn't know much about politics. I didn't study it carefully. I remember seeing the debate between he and Nixon's beard and the sweating and all that kind of thing. But that was, and then in November when he was killed, my grandmother was dying of cancer. We together watched his funeral, and the caisson and little John saluting. And I remember my grandmother, I kept looking at her because I knew she was dying. I could feel it. And she was gone 2 months later in January, and attended her funeral with brokenness. But I wondered what she was thinking then, and death and killing and pain, pathos. I had to fight not to let it destroy my dream for a better world. I remember my grandmother coming out of the kitchen again, and we were watching black and white television with the dogs and the firemen's hoses hosing down people in the streets of Mississippi and Alabama. And my grandmother would come out of the kitchen. She was born in East Texas. She remembers severe racism, but had moved away when she was a young woman and moved to Arizona and then to California with my mom. And I remember her standing there and shaking her head with an apron on, and sometimes a fork from frying chicken and cooking in the kitchen around the news time, dinner time. She would watch the news, and sometimes she'd fold her arms, or she would just stand there and go, I never heard her say one negative word, not one racist comment. Because of our particular religion, you're not supposed to say anything like that. I know she felt the pain, and I looked back at her to see. I could see it in her face, but I heard it more desperately in her voice. Shake her head. That was so painful for her. And then when President Kennedy was elected, she was so happy. And later on, he was assassinated, of course. And then when Dr. King was assassinated a few years after that, Kennedy in 1963, 5 years later, Dr. King. Only 10 years before he was assassinated, a female, an African-American female, who just had been released from a mental hospital, edged her way to the front of the line at a book signing and took out an envelope opener and a letter opener and stabbed Dr. King within inches of his life. He was hospitalized, and the doctor said that had he just sneezed or coughed, he could have hemorrhaged. That was a black woman. And now this white man's gun in Memphis, Tennessee, a city I had bad memories about. My first experience there was not pleasant, even though I went to the convocation of the Church of God in Christ. That part I loved, but the weighty racism that I felt in that city, I've never liked Memphis since. I've been there many times. I've preached there. I have friends there. It's different today than it was when I went in 1968 or 67, the first time, something like that. But I remember that the Lorraine Motel, I saw it. I didn't want to visit it. I had bad memories about it. Now it's a museum. They've spruced the place up, and it's a little bit more celebrative, I suppose. But the memory is not pleasant. Dr. King had a dream, and right now I'm looking and reflecting back on last year. This powerful gentleman, what he brought as a young man, I didn't realize when he died how young that really was. You know, I was 16 years old. He was 39. He was older to be my father, as I told you. My dad was only 2 years older than him. And so now that I'm 65, and I remember when I turned 40, I looked back and I remember that he was only 39 when he died. I've always loved him. I've always studied his speeches. He's been next to Jesus. Dr. King was, as far as his social activism and his spirituality, he was my hero, as he is and was to millions of people back then. But this statement, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite. That means unfinishable, unlimited hope. That's what I'm saying to you today, America. In light of all that's happening culturally and in our country, we never thought children would be snatched out of their mother's arms, infants, and warehoused and caged like animals. The things that have happened in this country, especially in the last 2 years, I'm stunned. And millions of us are, not just black people, but millions of people of all ethnicities, many, many whites. Sometimes the non-blacks are the most, non-ethnic are the most outspoken about the injustices that we are having to watch again. But that's a very encouraging quote from Dr. King. He had to go through that many times himself. The other quote I'm going to mention, and then my daughter, Majesty, is going to sing a song about that reflects the energy in this man and the promise in this man and the hope in this man. He says, in light, again, of where we are in this country right now, we must live together as brothers or perish together as fools. We must live together as brothers. That means as family. Male and female, brother, sister, parents. We must live together in this country, in this culture, really in this world as family or as brothers, or we will perish together as fools. In light of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and in your state capital and in your city, I'm thinking of the Native American veteran who was well into his 70s, beating a drum with these young white boys, mostly with the little caps, "Make America Great." Apparently, they were making fun of him, and they were taunting him and harassing him. And I had tears as he was beating the drum. An old man, you could see his aged face and skin and his jawbone, the large ears. He's sitting there beating in his native language. I don't know what he was chanting, but it moved me deeply, and it hurt me at the same time. And I saw those young men who are 21st century Americans. They should have a different outline or different view of the world than they do. But this culture is producing that kind of lethal hatred and toxic disrespect. Broke my heart. But that just lets me know that things can get better, and they will, and they need to. Dr. King, I saw a lot worse than that, and he kept on pushing, as Mother Sherman said. He kept on keeping on. So you do the same thing. We're going to have this song from Majesty. Then I'll come back and read to you just a few more of my favorite quotes from this brilliant, angelic prophet, Dr. Martin Luther King. Be right back.
When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There's a hero. If you look inside your heart, you don't have to be afraid of what you are. There's an answer if you reach within your soul, and the sorrow that you know will melt away. And then the hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive when you feel all hope is gone. Look inside you and be strong, then you'll finally see the truth that a hero lies in you. When you search the world alone, no one reaches out a hand for you to hold. You can find love if you search within yourself, and the emptiness you found won't disappear. with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and know you can survive when you feel all hope is gone. Look inside you and be strong, and you'll finally see the truth that a hero lies in you. Lord knows dreams are hard to follow. Don't let anyone tear them away. Hold on, there will be tomorrow. 'Cause in time you'll find a way. Then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive when you feel all hope is gone. Look inside you and be strong, then you'll finally see the truth that a hero lies in you. A hero lies in you.
Wonderful performance. Thank you, Majesty. And that song speaks the sentiments of millions of our hearts, all not only just in America, but all across the planet. Other countries, from South Africa to the top of the North Pole. People remembered this man who only lived 39 years, and he's a household word and has brought such hope and healing to so many people. One of my other favorite comments in light of me addressing the issues I've never been such a social activist. My denomination taught us to just pray and fast and seek God, which we still do, but we're not active politically. With African-American Baptists and Methodists and some of those groups usually tend to be a little bit more progressive, more educated. The schools and we Pentecostals were not that bright, and we didn't encourage education. Our founder had Bishop Charles Harrison Mates had a second grade education. But he was a thinker, and he read, and he was aware of what happened and built this major denomination. But he taught us to fast and pray. He was a pacifist. He believed in peace and thought he was following the tenets of Jesus. It wasn't too much for turning over tables like Jesus did of the money changers. Very peaceful man. I saw him only once and heard him once. He died in 1961, but a great spiritual leader. Anyway, I've been more active since I've been more inclusive, since I've gone through what you may have seen in the movie Come Sunday, when I believe that the goodness of God, if God really is a God of love, then that God would not exclude anyone from that redemptive love, and that in what we call the finished work of the cross, the whole world's sins and all sinners were atoned for. They don't know that, so the good news is that there is no issue between humans and God that hasn't been resolved. That's my Christian position. I'm not into gods that demand blood transactions and blood sacrifices anymore, but my understanding of the Christian gospel, the way I preached it and the one that got me in trouble with the fundamentalists, is that if Jesus died for one, he died for all. If his blood sacrificed for one sin, it sacrificed for all sin. So the world really is saved. They just don't know it. And if you're going to be an evangelist and carry good message, that's the word for gospel. If you're going to carry the gospel, you tell the people not to get saved, but they are saved and safe with God. Well, just that concept relaxes a lot of tension and makes people stop cowering in front of a God that they fear. We spend a lot of time trying to appease an angry God and please a difficult God. And that's caused the kind of psychosis that breeds racism and bigotry and discrimination and hatred. any religious fundamentalism tend to be militant and angry. Anyway, our lives begin, Dr. King says, to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I keep talking about it, and I've lost many friends because of it, because I can't keep silent as long as it's happening right in front of us. Some of my New Thought people want to hug a tree and, lay in a hole and talk about energy, and I agree with all of that stuff. I like it, I study it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't speak truth to power. Dr. King was first discouraged by African Americans who thought he was rocking the boat. They were settled into Jim Crow laws and lines. They were so happy to be out of quote-unquote authentic slavery, but many were just indentured servants and couldn't have education, couldn't vote, were still not considered American citizens, but they didn't want to rock the boat. The pain of the past memories were too great, so he took a risk. I like to say, if you're not living on the edge, you're probably taking up too much space. Dr. King was driven, but this statement he made because so many people criticized him for speaking out. I've been speaking out against dogmas and doctrines that I think are destructive, that are violent, that are vicious, that are destructive to the culture, that cause mental illnesses. Running and hiding from a God who you can't see, who's ubiquitous and has an opinion about you that's probably unfavorable and then will kill you and then torment you or torture you infinitely. Just the thought. People literally believe that they can and have displeased this God, and this God is angry and wrathful, and they need Jesus to protect them from that God. I don't know what Dr. King and I would have had some wonderful conversations about this because he was a broad thinker. I had a little bit of a conversation with his daughter, Bernice, when we sat together in a theater that was owned at that time by Magic Johnson in Atlanta, and we watched The Passion of Christ, the one that Mel Gibson came up with. And we saw the horrible treatment of Jesus on the cross based on Mel's interpretation of the crucifixion, asphyxiation on the cross. He literally choked on his own vomit maybe and saliva. It was horrible, and she was crying, and I was crying. She was sitting in the row in front of me. We went to eat afterward and talked for several hours. And one of the things she said, I'm not quite where you are, Bishop, but I often wonder how the man who was the number one mentor to my father, Mahatma Gandhi, could spend eternity in hell. She said, I can't reconcile that because it would indict my own dad. That was a powerful statement she made to me. I think she may have expanded somewhat since then, but not to the point to where I am with regarding radical inclusion of all human beings in the ultimate redemptive love of God. But anyway, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. What really matters to us? What really matters to you? How involved are you in that? Another one of my favorite statements by quotes by Dr. King, there comes a time when silence is betrayal. People have told me, keep your mouth shut, leave it alone, don't talk about that. Talk about happy, positive things, create a different kind of energy, and I understand that. And there are times to do that. Then there are times to really stir up the boat, rock the boat. There are times when I have to raise my voice to my own children. A couple times I raise it to my wife. You have to emphasize stuff. When a preacher's standing in the pulpit, he raises his voice. My kind of preaching that I was raised on him, he puts it out there, and he gets very demonstrative and sometimes physical. And whether you're Southern Baptist or Pentecostal, when a preacher gets passionate about the greatest preachers we've ever known, from Billy Graham to Hitler, and I hate to even put their names in the same sentence, but when Hitler felt passionate that he should kill the Jews who killed Jesus, that's a totally erroneous ideology because Jews didn't kill Jesus. Romans did. But he convinced all of Eastern Europe to support with him. But his voice, he spoke out. And others didn't as loudly as he did, and therefore 6 million Jews approximately were killed, and maybe 6 million other people, not to mention the millions of families that were scarred and broken and traumatized by all of the fallout, what they call collateral damage. So yes, there comes a time when you should speak out, regardless of what anybody else says. So I like that statement. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Another statement in reference to the same theme. In the end, Dr. King says, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Since I've been through what I've been through, I can imagine how much pain he was feeling when he said that. There were people who loved him, who were loyal to him, who followed the same Christ principle and had the same Christ consciousness as he did in general, but they were silent. They did not support him. They stood away and watched the movement take place without their active involvement. There's some people who are for you, but they're not with you. There's some people who are with you, but they're not for you. There's some people, I remember pastoring for 30 years. There were people in my congregation who were with me every Sunday, but they weren't for me. They came and critiqued every service, criticized me, criticized the sermon, was mean to church members. And I knew they were there. And then there was another group who were for me, but never darkened the door of my church. Never gave a dime toward the effort, but they liked what I was doing and saying, believed in me, believed in it. I go through that right now as an inclusionist, a radical inclusionist, as one who's expanded, who's leading this whole ComeMonday movement. I call myself a Pentecostal. And when I'm at church, the Unity Church, the Unitarian Church, I call myself a Unicostal, and they love that concept. My New Thought people love Metacostal. I still have my deep-rooted, transcendent Pentecostal roots. I love the Holy Ghost. I love the feelings that I experienced as a kid growing up in those kinds of churches and those kind of services. And when Dr. King gave his last speech in the temple of the Church of God in Christ, the global world headquarters of that movement, I thought that was indirectly, not at that time, but since, I thought that he was basically saying, okay, we've done the marches, we've done the politics, we've done the physical antics, we're going to turn it over to you, who claim to be spirit-filled, who speak in tongues, speak in the tongues of a culture that doesn't identify. We're going to turn this movement over to you. With your praying and your fasting and your miracles and your anticipations and your faith, take it, spiritualize it, and move it on. We didn't. We didn't even think about it. But when I started my Azusa conferences back in 1988, that's one of the thoughts that was in my mind. I remember, I think it was Brian Keith Williams brought that up to me, a brilliant thinker. And I remember Miles Monroe and Purpose, and we used to sit around as young black men and talk about this. And Oral Roberts had said that the last great revival, or he said the next great revival coming to America, he said that to me in 1987, would be led by people of color. And it was coming to and through the black church. That didn't register immediately with me, but it touched my heart that he would say that. I remember we were having lunch in one of the rooms there at the Mabee Center. I didn't have ties on. He didn't either. No makeup. He said, let's tape it. He felt the Holy Ghost. We rushed in. Our crew got together. When Oral Roberts says, I want to tape something, everybody stopped what they were doing. They rushed into the studio, and we sat there with no makeup, no ties, and we discussed it. I don't remember the other minister. There was a man I'd never met before, an African-American. He was sitting there with us. I wish I could remember his name. I wish I could contact him, but if he's still around. But Oral's made that statement on nationwide television. He aired it, and then he repeated it in our conferences. And I've been very sensitive to social activism, speaking truth to power. I've grown in that, and that's where I am today. In the end, Dr. King says, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. It's time to get involved in the movement, into expanded ways of thinking. When we ask you to become a part of ComeMonday, that's basically what I'm asking you. I think there's a generation of young people coming on who are waiting to hear this certain sound that we have, to identify with a certain emphasis and the message that we're speaking. He says also in A Testament of Hope, which is a book he wrote, the essential writings and speeches of Dr. King, written about him, there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. These are statements I read when I was going through and held on to for the last 15 years more emphatically, because I was drowning out there. I mean, I was going through this whole shift in consciousness that brought me to where I am today. Jesus, I followed Jesus, his teachings, what he went through as a human being based on the historical Christ, even though we can absolutely prove all the things that are written about him. But what he represented to me and what he represented in the earth and to so many people other than just the cross, but what he did, how he spoke truth to power. He was a humanitarian, I think. He was a sacred humanist. He loved humanity. His messages weren't overly profound. He talked about birds and wheat and sheep and goats. And, he's not somebody you'd travel a long way just to hear his messages. I've heard a lot of speakers that seem to be much more intriguing and profound to me than him. But I love his spirit. I love the simple message of love, unconditional love, radical inclusion. and that he weathered such a storm, and he was only 33 and a half when he was assassinated or crucified or executed, or whatever you want to say. So hear this statement again. There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, and mine wasn't, nor politic, nor popular. You could say nor politically correct, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience, conscience, with knowledge, something you know in your soul, in yourself, in your cells, you know it has to be dealt with. I believed a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I stopped dealing with what I believed and start embracing and accepting what my soul, what my cells, what my spirit knew or had remembered from some pre-incarnate reality. I came here knowing, I think we all come here knowing. That's why we come here, to bring that knowledge. The problem is that between the womb and the tomb, we forget what we knew when we came. We go through what I call spiritual amnesia. We forget it. And then we start believing other things that somebody hands down or trades down. That's what tradition means. Trades down to us. Let me read another of his comments, since we'll only be a few more minutes. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Oh my God. I've been really wrestling with some of my evangelical friends about everybody's going to support. No president's perfect, but there's just mass support by some of my fundamentalist evangelical Pentecostal friends, especially the non-black ones or the ones not of color, that are so avidly supportive of an energy that is not at all like Christ. Nothing, reflecting nothing of the way Christ operated. And they're Christians. They're the followers of the Prince of Peace. And yet they're huge supporters of war and violence. And they say in God we trust, but it's really sometimes more in guns that we trust. I think Dr. King would be very upset about that. I think Dr. King would be strongly for much stronger regulations and restrictions around gun control. We believe in possessing. He may have hunted. His father, I know my dad did. My dad owned a rifle till he died. We always had a rifle in the house. I think there might be one in there now. My dad left us about 3 years ago, and that's one of the things. I used to go hunting with him, rabbit hunting, when I was a kid, me and my brother, and he would shoot. So I'm not totally anti-guns, but I am anti-hatred and anti-killing recklessly and giving guns to people without proper research on their background studies to see who these people are, if they're sane, and even some who are sane in their past are insane today, and they may do anything. We need to really be careful how we handle guns. But anyway, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. I see a lot of people that are just ignoring. Ignorance doesn't mean to not know. It means to not notice or refuse to make note of. It's obvious we're dealing with something very strange and extravagant and contorted, twisted in our culture right now. Something that is not really working well with or for us. And the people who seem to ignore that are the ones that are contributing to it. He also said the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. It would be irresponsible for us, in light and celebration of Dr. King, not to speak up. Whether it was for the trash collectors in Memphis, or standing behind Rosa Parks, or going across the bridge in Selma, Alabama. This man stood for hurting, suffering humanity. That would be tens of thousands of immigrants trying to get into this country. No responsible American wouldn't respect the idea of border control and border security. But to go excessive into it, to call out military as if, in fact, the kind of things that's happening right now through the Trump administration are a lot worse than immigrants coming in. He's shutting down the government. Immigrants can't do that, wouldn't do it, haven't done it, wouldn't know how to do it. Wouldn't shut the whole government down and cause people to lose tomorrow, Tuesday, they're going to lose their checks. They're not going to have money again. Some of them are being forced to work, and they're never going to get back pay for the time they've been forced out of work, and they have mouths to feed. This is insane. I would have never expected it in this culture. Dr. King would not be happy with that, and in honor of him, I must speak of it. Again, we must come to see that in the end, we What we seek, as I close, is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. That's what Dr. King said. Isn't that wonderful? We must come to see that the end we seek is a society at peace with itself, a society that can live with its conscience. Wow, I love that. The final comment, quote, and then Madge will take us out with another song that will reflect the greatness of this man and of his spirit. As my sufferings mounted, he says, I soon realized that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation. This is one of the most powerful, influential statements, quotes that Dr. King had as I was going through. The worst of mine is over, but when it really started, the last 15 years, it was painful. As my sufferings mounted, I soon realized, Dr. King said, that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. Wow. These statements have guided me greatly in my life, but particularly the last 15 years. I was 50 when I really began to speak out and address these issues about inclusion and what I thought was inaccuracies in our interpretation of Scripture and that were harmful. And as I grew, I became worse. I got more and more into it. So that statement, and it hurt. I mean, to lose the kinds of things that I'm here to talk about, not to talk about me. He lost his whole life. He left a young mother and 3 children in this country. If it wasn't for people like Harry Belafonte, and later on the Aretha Franklins and others that came in to support the family and to support Coretta Scott King and to help them survive. They never became millionaires and billionaires and commanded lots of money. They were humble people that lived their lives as orphans, though everybody put their arms around them in our culture. Many people did. I've only met Bernice, but I think that those King children have gone through a great deal. And as we celebrate their father today, we don't want to remember who they're becoming and what they've been through. We buried Coretta Scott not too many years ago, a wonderful, elegant woman who loved everybody, was a radical inclusionist, even supported same-gender marriages. You wouldn't believe that. She was supporting the rights of the LGBTQ community. She came right out and said it. She thought it was inhumane to treat any American citizen or any human being with the kind of disregard with which our LGBTQ community has been treated, mostly by the same people that support Trump, the evangelical, ultra-conservative, right-wing Christians. We're Christians. I mean, wow, it's stunning. So we're learning, we're healing, we're growing. Something is changing radically inside of us, and Trump has drawn attention to it. If you want to say God put him there, that would be the reason God put him there, to bring our attention to what lives at the core of this country in its religious presuppositions and notions. And things need to be corrected. You don't have to end it, but you sure ought to amend it, right? I love you. I believe in you. God bless you. God be you. We'll close with this song titled Home from the musical The Wiz. It's one of my favorite songs that Majesty sings, and it touches the core in all of us, going back to that safe space where we are embraced and caressed in the cushion of love, in unconditional love, in radical inclusion, at home where we are safe. Good night. God bless you.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city.
When I think of home, I think of a place where there's love overflowing. I wish I was home. I wish I was back there with the things I've been knowing. Wind that makes the tall grass bend into leaning, and suddenly the raindrops that fall have a meaning. The sea start again. Well, suddenly my world's gone and changed its face, but I know where I'm going. I have had my mind spin around in space, and yet I've watched it growing. Oh, if you're listening, God, please don't make it hard to believe in the things that we see. Oh, should we try and